The year 1214 marked a turning point in medieval Europe, a time of shifting alliances, contested thrones, and monarchs willing to wager everything in pursuit of power. At the center of the conflict stood Holy Roman Emperor Otto IV, embroiled in a bitter feud with Pope Innocent III over the right to appoint bishops. What began as a religious dispute soon exposed a deeper rift between imperial authority and papal supremacy. Across the Channel, King John of England was locked in his own struggle. Humiliated by previous defeats and stripped of his continental holdings, John refused to recognize Philip II of France as the rightful overlord of Normandy and other lost lands. The old Anglo-French rivalry flared once more. Together, Otto and John forged a fragile alliance, a patchwork coalition of rebel nobles, mercenaries and foreign knights, bound not by loyalty but by a shared desire to check the rise of the French crown. Among their number stood hardened veterans like William Longsword, Earl of Salisbury, and the notorious Eustace the Monk, pirate, mercenary, and killer. But France would not go quietly. King Philip II Augustus, shrewd, methodical, and relentless, summoned his vassals and called the kingdom to arms. Among his trusted lieutenants was Philip of Alsace, Count of Flanders, a veteran of the Third Crusade and no stranger to the fury of battle. The stage was set. On the flat fields near the village of Bouvines, beneath a hot midsummer sun, two great coalitions gathered. One sought to restore lost glory, the other to preserve hard-won power. What followed would echo across Europe for generations. As dawn broke over the plains of northern France, the scale of the coming battle emerged. King Philip II commanded between 6,000 and 7,000 men, nobles, town militias, and mercenaries. At the core were 1,200 knights, including 765 from the royal domain, supported by 300 mounted sergeants. Around 5,000 infantry from towns like Amiens, Beauvais, and Soissons filled the ranks. The French army formed in three wings. On the right, the Knights of Champagne and Burgundy stood under Eudes, Duke of Burgundy. In the center, Philip himself commanded the royal elite and 2,000 infantry from Ile-de-France and Normandy. On the left, Robert of Dreux and Count William of Ponthieu led Breton cavalry and local levies. A small reserve guarded the bridge behind them, the only secure crossing and possible retreat. Across the field, Emperor Otto IV's coalition outnumbered them with nearly 9,000 men. But despite its size, the force was divided, its leaders competing for glory. Otto had between 1,300 and 1,500 knights, 600 from Flanders, 400 from Hainaut, and others drawn from across the empire, supported by 7,500 infantry, German pikemen, English archers, and Flemish militias, many serving for pay rather than loyalty. Otto's army also formed in three wings. On the left, Ferrand of Flanders commanded Flemish and Hainaut knights and infantry, hardened by years of border wars. In the center, Otto led Saxon and German infantry in tight phalanxes, flanked by Lorraine, Brabant, and Namur knights, with 50 elite German knights as his personal guard. On the right, Renaud de Damartin commanded English knights, under the Earl of Salisbury and Brabançon foot, with English longbowmen on the far flank. Soon after noon, the first clash erupted on the south flank. French light cavalry probed the Flemish lines, and some knights, eager for glory, gave chase. Their pursuit turned costly. Disordered, they were struck by the Knights of Champagne. The crash was deafening. Lances splintered, armor rang, and unarmored horses went down screaming. Flemish knights were dragged from their saddles and taken prisoner. Count Ferrand of Flanders charged to save them, but the full force of the French right wing met him head-on. Shields locked, steel rang, and the line buckled. After hours of brutal fighting, Ferrand was unhorsed, wounded, and forced to surrender. His flank collapsed. At the center, the fight was at its fiercest. The French infantry, stretched deliberately thin to avoid encirclement, braced as Otto's mercenaries and German knights surged forward. Saxon and Flemish pikes drove into the levy lines. Shields splintered. Dust clouds rose, stinging eyes and coating armor. The Germans broke through in places, dangerously close to the king. Philip committed his reserve, 700 household knights. They struck like a hammer. In the crush, a hooked polearm dragged Philip from his saddle. For a moment, disaster loomed. His knights closed around him in a desperate ring, the clatter of hooves and clash of swords surrounding the king as they hoisted him onto a fresh mount and countercharged with ferocity. Sensing his moment, Emperor Otto IV hurled his German cavalry forward. Standards snapped in the hot wind. The imperial charge smashed into the French center. Otto's horse went down in the melee, throwing him to the ground. He fought on foot, falchion in hand, his 50 guards holding back the French as the center began to buckle. But before the emperor could rally, the French knights on the left wing wheeled inward. Charging across the open ground, they slammed into the exposed flank of the imperial center. Otto's dismounted struggle turned desperate as his knights were struck from two sides. The shock of the assault shattered their cohesion, cutting down the infantry that had broken through earlier. Under the combined pressure from Philip's reserve and the left-wing charge, the imperial line crumbled. The double-headed eagle banner was seized, and Otto escaped only because his remaining knights sacrificed themselves in a last stand. On the French left, the Allied right wing, led by William Longespee of England and Renaud de Damartin, arrived too late to support the other flanks. They formed a defensive ring. Brabançon pikemen bristled outward, while knights launched sorties from within. English longbowmen loosed arrows into the press. Robert of Dreux and the Bishop of Beauvais led repeated assaults. French knights took losses battering the fortress of pikes, but each attack weakened the circle. Longespee was unhorsed and captured. Renaud fought on foot until he too was overwhelmed. The Dukes of Limburg and Brabant, seeing the battle lost, turned back without engaging. The Brabançon mercenaries fought to the last before being surrounded and beaten. By evening, the battle was over. The air hung thick with dust and the smell of trampled grass. Both sides had lost roughly 1,000 men, but the French held more than prisoners. Over 131 captured knights and 5 counts were in their hands. Among them Count of Flanders, Renaud of Boulogne and William Longespee, the Earl of Salisbury. The French had not merely held the field, they had shattered a coalition of kings, rebels and lords. Bouvines was more than a victory, it was a declaration. France had faced the full might of its enemies and triumphed. The Battle of Bouvines sent shockwaves through the courts of Europe. Otto IV fled in disgrace. Within a year he was deposed, his authority shattered. Philip II Augustus emerged transformed. His victory cemented royal power in the north and laid the groundwork for a centralized French state. In England, King John's part in the defeat fueled rebellion. Within a year, his barons forced him to seal the Magna Carta, a charter that would echo through history. Bouvines became legend, praised by chroniclers, sung by minstrels, and remembered as a triumph of unity, discipline, and resolve. France had stood alone and prevailed, reshaping Europe's political order.